Have you ever felt like the world keeps asking you to be less? Less sensitive, less intense, less you? What if the very things you've been criticized for, your overthinking, your emotional depth, your inability to just get over things, are actually signs of something rare? Something Carl Jung believed the world desperately needs more of? What if you were never broken? What if you were just different? What if everything you've been taught to see as a flaw is actually a gift that's been misunderstood? There's a term Carl Jung used that most people have never heard: differentiated consciousness. It describes a rare type of awareness and emotional depth that doesn't easily conform to what society expects. If you've always been told you're too much or too sensitive, this video is not just a reflection. It's a homecoming. You know that feeling, don't you? The one where you walk into a room and immediately sense the unspoken tension between two people, where you can hear what someone isn't saying louder than their actual words, where a single conversation can leave you emotionally drained for hours. You've probably been told you overthink, that you're too complicated, that you make things harder than they need to be. But what if I told you that you were never the problem? You were just born into a world that doesn't know what to do with depth. Jung believed that certain individuals are born with what he called psychic sensitivity, an ability to perceive and process emotional and psychological information that others simply can't access. It's not a choice. It's not a flaw. It's how you're wired. And if you're watching this, chances are you're one of them. 1. The punishment for depth. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's not real, but her story is one I've heard countless variations of, a composite of the experiences shared by those who carry this rare psychological wiring. As a child, Sarah would cry watching the news, not because she was weak or overly dramatic, but because she could feel the pain of strangers as if it were her own. When she saw footage of natural disasters, she didn't just think, "That's sad." She felt the terror of the families fleeing, the grief of those who lost everything, the overwhelming helplessness of the aid workers trying to help. Her parents, well-meaning but overwhelmed by her intensity, would say, "Don't be so dramatic, Sarah. It's just TV. These things don't affect us." But for Sarah, just TV was a window into human suffering that felt as real and immediate as if it were happening in her own living room. By age 8, she learned that her natural responses were wrong. Where teachers seemed sad, Sarah would approach with genuine concern, only to be told she was being inappropriate or too personal. When she noticed her friend was being left out and tried to include her, she was labeled bossy or overly involved. By age 12, she learned to keep her observations to herself. When she noticed her teacher was struggling with something personal, she could see it in the way the woman's smile never quite reached her eyes. She stayed quiet. When she sensed her friend's parents were fighting, she could feel the tension radiating from her friend like heat from a fever. She pretended not to know. When she felt the deep sadness her mother carried, but never spoke about, she became the family comedian instead, using humor to try to lighten what felt unbearably heavy. Sound familiar? You were punished for your depth. Not maliciously, perhaps, but consistently. Labeled dramatic, moody, overcomplicated, too intense, even by those closest to you. Your emotional intelligence, which should have been celebrated as a remarkable gift, became your emotional burden to bear in silence. The world taught you that feeling deeply was inconvenient, that seeing clearly made others uncomfortable, that your natural way of being, this beautiful, complex, multi-layered consciousness you were born with, was somehow wrong, inappropriate, too much for others to handle. You learned to see your sensitivity as a character flaw rather than a rare gift. You learned to apologize for your depth rather than honor it. You learned to minimize your perceptions rather than trust them. 2. The split self. So you did what any intelligent, adaptive person would do. You learned to live two lives. The outward one, charming, agreeable, safe, manageable, easy to be around, never too much trouble. The one that laughed at the right times, stayed quiet when your insights might make others uncomfortable, smiled when you felt like crying. And the inner one, observant, analytical, overflowing with truths no one seemed ready to hear. The one that noticed everything, felt everything, processed everything, but learned to keep it all locked away like secrets too dangerous to share. Jung called this outward adaptation your persona, the mask you wear to survive in the world. But for people like you, for those with differentiated consciousness, the gap between persona and authentic self becomes a canyon that grows wider with each passing year. You became fluent in a kind of psychological translation, translating your complexity into simplicity that others could digest, your depth into surface-level pleasantries that wouldn't overwhelm, your truth into palatable versions that others could handle without feeling threatened or uncomfortable. Sarah learned to speak in emotional shorthand. Instead of saying, "I can feel that you're deeply hurt about something, and I want you to know you're not alone," she learned to say, "How's your day going?" Instead of sharing her rich inner world of observations and insights, she learned to stick to safe topics, weather, work, weekend plans. But here's what nobody told you, what nobody warns you about when you're learning these survival skills. Every time you translated yourself down, every time you chose the acceptable version over the authentic one, you lost a piece of who you really were. Every time you silenced your truth to maintain harmony, you betrayed yourself in small but significant ways. The persona was supposed to be a tool, a costume you could put on and take off as needed. But for many rare personalities, it becomes a prison, one you're afraid to leave because you've forgotten who you are without it. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, it means you're ready. Don't turn away. This recognition, uncomfortable as it is the first step toward coming home to yourself. 3. The invisible labor. You became something Jung never specifically named, but would have recognized: a silent emotional sponge, absorbing the tension in rooms before anyone else noticed it was there, soothing others before they even realized they needed soothing, managing everyone's emotional comfort except your own. In Jung's framework, you developed what he called inferior function compensation. Your natural sensitivity, instead of being protected and honored, became a tool for survival. You became hyper-attuned to what others needed because your own emotional needs were never adequately met or even acknowledged. You learned to read micro-expressions like a survival skill, to sense when someone was about to get upset and preemptively smooth things over, to carry emotional responsibility for situations that weren't even yours to fix, to become the emotional shock absorber for everyone around you. Sarah developed what she privately called her radar, an uncanny ability to sense when her mother was having a bad day before her mother even knew it herself. She would come home from school and immediately adjust her energy to match what was needed. Quiet and undemanding when her mother seemed overwhelmed. Cheerful and entertaining when the house felt too heavy. Responsible and mature when things felt chaotic. She became the family's emotional thermostat, constantly adjusting the temperature to keep everyone comfortable. She learned to carry her father's disappointments, her mother's anxieties, her siblings' insecurities, all while presenting a cheerful, capable facade that convinced everyone she was fine. But here's the cruel irony, the psychological trap that so many rare personalities fall into. Because you became so competent at managing everyone else's emotions, no one ever asks how you're doing. Because you're so good at appearing strong and capable, people assume you're always fine. Your competence became your cage. Your ability to hold space for others meant no one thought to hold space for you. You became the one others turned to in crisis, but never the one others checked on during quiet moments. You became valued for what you could provide rather than appreciated for who you were. And slowly, invisibly, you began to lose track of where others' emotions ended and yours began. 4. The Great Disappearance. So you made a choice that felt like wisdom, but was actually self-abandonment. You made yourself smaller. You mistook shrinking for safety. Hiding your truth felt like the only way to survive in a world that seemed overwhelmed by your natural intensity. You learned to laugh when you wanted to cry, to stay silent when you wanted to speak your truth, to agree when every fiber of your being disagreed. You became an expert at reading the room and adjusting your energy to match what was wanted, not what was real. This process happens so gradually, so naturally, that most people don't even realize they're doing it. You start censoring yourself in small ways, not sharing an insight that might be too intense, not expressing an emotion that might make others uncomfortable, not asking for what you need because you've learned that your needs are too much. Sarah learned to perform normalcy like an actor playing a role. She developed different versions of herself for different audiences. The professional version for work, the agreeable version for family gatherings, the fun version for social events. Each version carefully calibrated to give others what they wanted while requiring as little emotional labor from them as possible. By 25, she was successful by every external measure. Good job, nice apartment, people who liked her. She had mastered the art of being whoever others needed her to be. But she would lie awake at night feeling like she was living someone else's life, like the real Sarah was trapped somewhere deep inside, watching this performance from behind bulletproof glass. The exhaustion you feel, that bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep seems to cure, it's not for working too hard at your job or managing too many responsibilities. It's from working against your own nature every single day. It's from constantly monitoring and adjusting yourself to be acceptable. It's from living in a state of chronic emotional vigilance, always alert to what others need from you. But here's the truth that Jung understood and that our culture has forgotten. Hiding didn't protect you. It erased you. The very thing you thought would keep you safe actually made you disappear, piece by piece, until you became a stranger to yourself. You've carried this weight long enough. You've performed this role long enough. Let yourself be still for once. Let yourself remember who you are beneath all the adaptations. 5. The rare truth. Carl Jung spent his life studying what he called psychological types, and he made a discovery that changed everything. Certain personality configurations are simply less common in the general population. Not less valuable, not less important, just less frequent, like having green eyes or being left-handed, but for consciousness itself. Jung believed that what we call rare personalities aren't defective humans who failed to develop properly. They are evolutionary bridges, individuals born with expanded capacity for emotional and spiritual processing, here to expand human consciousness, to bring depth to a surface-oriented world, to feel what others cannot yet feel. In his work with patients, Jung noticed that those who struggled most with fitting in often possessed what he called superior function development. They had developed aspects of consciousness that were more advanced, more sensitive, more complex than what their environment could support or understand. But here's the crucial part. Until they reclaim their true nature, until they stop trying to fit their expanded consciousness into conventional boxes, they often feel exiled from themselves, cut off from their own source of vitality and purpose. You are not alone in this experience. You're part of what Jung might call a psychological minority, those born with the capacity for deeper emotional and spiritual processing. In indigenous cultures, in societies that understood the value of different types of consciousness, people like you would have been recognized as healers, seers, wisdom keepers, shamans, those who could bridge the seen and unseen worlds. In our culture, you were told to fit in. You were pathologized for your sensitivity. You were medicated for your depth. You were taught to see your natural gifts as disorders to be managed rather than abilities to be cultivated. Think about this. Every quality you've been criticized for, your emotional intensity, your tendency to overthink, your inability to just get over things, your need for deeper meaning. These are actually signs of expanded consciousness trying to express itself in a world that doesn't yet have adequate containers for what you naturally are. 6. The impossibility of false self. Jung was adamant about something that most people find difficult to accept. You cannot thrive by pretending to be someone else. He called it the transcendent function, the psychological process by which you integrate all parts of yourself, not just the socially acceptable ones. This isn't just philosophical theory, it's biological reality. When you consistently act against your natural psychological wiring, your nervous system registers it as a form of chronic stress. Your body knows when you're lying about who you are, even when your mind has convinced itself it's necessary. Fitting in, for someone with your psychological makeup, is a slow erosion of soul. You try to play the game, the networking that feels like performance art, the small talk that feels like speaking a foreign language, the constant modulation of your energy to match what others can handle. But no amount of external success, no amount of approval or achievement, quiets that persistent sense that something essential is missing. Because it is. You're missing you. Sarah discovered this in therapy when her counselor asked a simple question. When was the last time you felt truly seen? Not admired for what you accomplish or appreciated for what you provide, but seen for who you actually are. Sarah sat in silence for a full 5 minutes, trying to remember a single instance, and realized she couldn't. That ache you feel, that persistent sense of loneliness even when you're surrounded by people, that feeling of being simultaneously overstimulated and deeply unfulfilled, it's not depression in the clinical sense. It's homesickness for yourself. It's your soul trying to get your attention, trying to remind you of who you really are beneath all the adaptations. Jung believed that this homesickness is actually a form of sacred discontent, your psyche's way of refusing to settle for anything less than authentic expression. It's your inner wisdom rejecting the false self, no matter how well it seems to be working from the outside. 7. The hidden cost. Your exhaustion. That profound tiredness that goes deeper than physical fatigue comes from self-abandonment. You're not tired of life. You're tired of performing a version of yourself to survive it. Jung identified this as one of the primary sources of what he called neurosis, the psychological splitting that happens when we systematically reject essential parts of ourselves to gain acceptance from others. For rare personalities, this splitting is particularly devastating because you're rejecting the very qualities that make you who you are. The anxiety you feel in social situations isn't social anxiety in the traditional sense. It's the stress of constant code switching, of perpetually monitoring and adjusting yourself. The emotional fatigue you experience after gatherings isn't because you're introverted. It's because you've been performing psychological translation for hours, converting your natural complexity into digestible simplicity. Every day you choose the false self over the true self. You create what Jung called psychic inflation, an internal pressure that builds and builds until it becomes unbearable. Think of it like holding your breath underwater. You can do it for a while, but eventually your body will force you to surface for air. Sarah described it perfectly. I feel like I'm constantly holding my breath, waiting for permission to be myself. But the permission never comes, so I just keep holding my breath until I feel like I'm drowning in my own life. This is why you can succeed at everything and still feel empty. This is why you can be surrounded by people who like you and still feel profoundly alone. This is why you can check all the boxes of a good life, career, relationships, achievements, and still wake up feeling like something is fundamentally wrong. Nothing is wrong with your life. Something is wrong with your relationship to yourself. You've been trying to water a garden with the wrong kind of water, trying to feed your soul with the wrong kind of food, trying to love yourself with the wrong kind of love. Take a breath. Feel the weight of recognition. You don't have to fix this right now. You just have to see it clearly. You just have to stop gaslighting yourself about your own experience. 8. The permission you've been waiting for. Jung called the healing process individuation, becoming whole by reclaiming your full self, not just the acceptable fragments. But individuation requires something that our culture makes almost impossible: the courage to disappoint people who can only love edited versions of you. Here's what Jung understood that most people don't. You're not here to be understood by everyone. This isn't a character flaw or a limitation. It's a feature of how consciousness works. Not everyone has the capacity to appreciate depth. Not everyone can handle emotional honesty. Not everyone is ready for the kind of consciousness you naturally embody. And that's not your problem to solve. It's not your responsibility to make yourself digestible to people who can only handle surface-level interaction. It's not your job to translate your complexity into simplicity just to make others comfortable. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege comes with a price that most people aren't willing to pay. You have to stop seeking validation from people who fundamentally cannot see you. Sarah, in her healing journey, had to face this reality. She had to let go of friends who only liked her easy version, the one who never brought up anything heavy, who always said yes, who absorbed their problems without ever sharing her own. She had to disappoint family members who preferred her as their emotional caretaker rather than as a full human being with her own needs and boundaries. She had to risk being called selfish when she started prioritizing her own emotional well-being. She had to risk being called difficult when she stopped automatically agreeing with everyone. She had to risk being called changed when she stopped performing the version of herself that everyone was comfortable with. But what she found on the other side was something she'd never experienced before: peace. Not the peace of being liked by everyone, but the peace of being real. Not the peace of conflict avoidance, but the peace of authentic alignment. The people who truly matter, who can love the real you rather than just the useful you. They don't disappear when you become authentic. They get closer. They feel safer with you because they can sense that you're finally being genuine. They start showing you their real selves too, because authenticity is contagious. 9. The boundary revolution. You need boundaries, not because you're cold or uncaring, but because you're deep and sensitive. Your emotional sensitivity isn't weakness. It's psychic radar operating at frequencies most people can't even detect. But unless you create conscious, intentional boundaries, your gift becomes your wound. Jung understood that highly sensitive individuals must learn what he called conscious discrimination, the ability to choose what energy you absorb and what you deflect, what voices you listen to and which ones you tune out, what emotional labor you take on and what you lovingly decline. This is not about becoming hard or closed off. This is about becoming conscious about how you use your energy. It's about recognizing that your emotional capacity, while vast, is not infinite. It's about understanding that saying no to some things allows you to say a deeper yes to what really matters. For Sarah, learning boundaries was like learning a new language. She had to practice saying, "I can see you're going through something difficult and I care about you, but I'm not in a space to hold that energy right now." She had to learn to leave social gatherings when she felt overstimulated rather than pushing through until she was completely depleted. She had to stop being available for everyone's emotional emergencies. She had to learn that being empathetic didn't mean being responsible for everyone's feelings. She had to understand that loving someone doesn't mean absorbing their pain. This means saying no to conversations that drain you without offering anything meaningful in return. It means limiting your exposure to people who consistently take more than they give. It means no longer being the go-to person for everyone's problems unless you've consciously chosen to take on that role. It means protecting your inner world, your thoughts, your emotions, your energy, your creative space, with the same fierceness that others protect their material possessions. You've been taught that having boundaries makes you mean selfish, uncaring. But boundaries don't make you less loving. They make your love sustainable. They don't make you less compassionate. They ensure that your compassion comes from a place of choice rather than compulsion. Here's a question to sit with, to journal about, to let percolate through your consciousness. What part of yourself have you silenced just to feel loved? What aspects of your authentic nature have you hidden because you were afraid of rejection? 10. The magnet effect. Here's something Jung observed that will change how you think about relationships. You attract the wrong people when you abandon your truth. Those who loved your people-pleaser version, your always available version, your never too much trouble version, they may disappear when you stop performing those roles. And that's not loss, it's alignment. Jung believed that when you live as your authentic self, you become what he called a psychological magnet. You naturally draw on people who resonate with your true frequency, not just those who benefit from your false compliance or your self-abandonment. When you stop hiding your depth, you attract people who appreciate complexity. When you stop minimizing your sensitivity, you draw in others who value emotional intelligence. When you stop performing ease and start expressing your authentic self, including your struggles, your questions, your profound way of seeing the world. You create space for real connection. This process can be initially lonely. Sarah described the transition period as feeling like she was between worlds, no longer willing to engage in superficial connections, but not yet surrounded by people who could meet her at her authentic level. But then something beautiful began to happen. When she started expressing her real opinions rather than just agreeable ones, she met people who shared her values and her way of thinking. When she began honoring her need for deep conversation instead of small talk, she attracted friends who also craved meaningful connection. When she stopped hiding her emotional intensity and started speaking her truth about life, about meaning, about the things that really mattered to her, deeper, more conscious people began to appear in her life. People who appreciated her complexity rather than asking her to simplify it. People who found her depth refreshing rather than overwhelming. The most profound shift was that she stopped having to work so hard to maintain relationships. When you're being authentic, relationships become easier, not harder. You don't have to remember which version of yourself you were with different people. You don't have to constantly monitor and adjust your energy. You can just be. Notice what part of you feels resistant to this idea. That's the part that still believes you have to earn love by being less than you are. That's the part that's been trained to see authenticity as selfish. Observe that resistance with compassion. It's been trying to protect you in the only way it knew how. You're not too much. The world has just been too shallow. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying human consciousness, and he came to a radical conclusion. The individuals who struggle most with fitting in are often the very ones humanity needs most. Rare personalities are here to wake the world up, to model emotional honesty, to ask deeper questions, to feel what others cannot yet feel. But that awakening begins with no longer apologizing for your depth. The pain you've carried, the sense of being wrong, broken, too complicated, it was never your flaw. It was the cost of holding onto your truth in a world that never reflected it back to you. Think of it this way. You've been speaking a native language that most people don't understand. The problem isn't your language. It's that you've been surrounded by people who only speak surface level. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've rejected or hidden. For rare personalities, your shadow often contains your greatest gifts. Your intensity? That's your passion trying to emerge. Your overthinking? That's your wisdom processing complex information. Your emotional sensitivity? That's your intuition operating at frequencies others can't access. What you've been taught to see as flaws are actually superpowers that haven't been properly understood or directed. Sarah learned to see her emotional sensitivity not as a burden, but as a compass. It guided her away from situations and people that weren't aligned with her truth. It helped her create art that moved people. It allowed her to support others in ways that felt genuine rather than obligatory. Don't shrink. Don't simplify. You're not here to fit in. You're here to bring something different, something deeper, something real. The moment you stop hiding your rare nature, something magical happens. You don't just heal yourself. You give others permission to do the same. You become living proof that depth is not only acceptable, it's essential. Your sensitivity shows others that it's safe to feel. Your complexity shows others that it's okay to be multifaceted. Your refusal to be surface level invites others into their own depths. Jung believed that individuation is not just a personal process, it's a collective one. Every person who reclaims their authentic self raises the consciousness of the whole. You are not an accident. You're not a mistake. You're not too much. You are exactly what this world needs more of. Someone willing to be real in a world obsessed with pretense. Someone willing to feel deeply in a culture that values numbness. Someone willing to speak truth in spaces that prefer comfortable lies. Here's your final reflection. If you could live as your truest self for just one day, without fear of judgment or rejection, what would that look like? The answer to that question? That's not a fantasy. That's your roadmap home. If this resonated with something deep inside you, If you felt seen in a way that both comforted and challenged you, know that you're not alone in this journey. And if you're ready to explore more about reclaiming your authentic self through Jung's wisdom, through the deep work of coming home to who you really are, I'll be here creating content that honors the profound depth you carry.